Brought to you by the Every Dollar app. Start budgeting for free today.
We're going to take on some economic issues. We've been talking about some economic issues because they affect your actual pocketbook, and this is a show that is about your money and how it affects your life. And so we preach a lot of personal responsibility. We preach control what you can control. However, we want to not just inform you on how to get out of debt, how to do a budget. We want you to understand how economics work and economic policies because you have a say in it. And so don't get squeamish. Don't get nervous. We're not going left. We're not going right today. We're going to talk about, as I talked about a couple weeks ago, Rachel, you missed it. I talked about the one issue that I think American people ought to be uniting on in this election is the national debt. In other words, we need a constitutional amendment that would require a balanced budget, like many states, the state of Tennessee, the state of Virginia, where I'm from. Many states have a constitutional requirement for a balanced budget. So big in the news. In fact, Dave was on Fox News talking about Laura Ingraham, had him on the Ingraham Angle to talk about Vice President Kamala Harris's economic plan. And specifically, it's been floated that she would be in favor of price controls to control inflation. Okay, so I want to break this down very, very briefly. I went and did some research. This is not my opinion here. I'm going to walk briefly through about 11 things that would happen. This is from a well-known economist that understands food and food pricing. But let me first explain, Rachel, and to our audience, price control, the idea is it sounds really great on the surface, right? Wait a second. You mean the government can pass legislation that would say, we have to keep prices at this much. And it sounds really great because, the price of a combo meal or the price of groceries.
We don't want it to go up because it's affecting
sounds
us.
great.
Yeah.
But what actually happens? So I'm going to roll through this really fast.
I love it. This is economist Ken.
Yeah. So this is 101, economics 101. Here's how this would go. So the government would announce that grocery retailers cannot raise prices. In other words, this is price control, fixed prices. Grocery stores, which operate on about a 1% to 2% margin, they're not going to be able to survive if their suppliers raise prices. So then the government says, oh, well, you know what? Cattle farmers, you can't raise prices on beef, right? Now, stores in lower income areas, understand this, grocery stores, we're talking about food here. Grocery stores in lower income areas, they make less money than higher income grocers because they sell a lot more of the prepackaged or processed food. Think center of the store versus outside of the store where you're talking about fresh meat and fresh fruit and things of that nature. That's higher priced items. So they now can't cover their overhead because while their prices have to stay the same, they still have to pay people to actually work, and those prices aren't fixed. So all of a sudden, watch this, you start to have food deserts in lower income areas.
Which is that is happening to a degree here.
To a degree, but we're talking massive.
Yeah, this is on a bigger scale.
So think urban and think rural, low income areas all of a sudden can't get food. Next, margins for food producers, as I mentioned earlier, are eroding. So now they're having to deal with overhead. So now they're dealing with real issues of we got to reinvest with production capacity. Food producers are making lower margins, so they stop making the products. And then the grocery chains start competing with each other because now it's like there's only so much inventory, so they start competing. So what do? They start negotiating, well, we'll get you payment faster. And so then who gets cut out? That leads to the smaller food producers and the smaller grocers. They get cut out.
They're out.
Go out of business. These are real jobs, real lives. Now watch. The supply chain breaks down because the food, it's not available. Supply chain breaks down. And so now all of a sudden cities are assigning police officers outside of grocery stores to manage the crowds, the mobs that are standing in line waiting to get food. This is all real. Okay, this happened in the Great Depression. This is not a fantasy. It happens in Venezuela, to give an example, when it's socialism and it turns into communism type rule. So here's what happens. Now it gets really bad. So the federal government goes, we got to fix it. So they announce a program to come in and say the federal government's in charge of all food distribution. You want the government in charge of your food distribution? So now everything's fixed. And now there's just people trying to make it. And it's profiteering. It actually can drive prices up, the very thing it was designed to not do. Because now it's like piracy. It's like, who's got the most cash?
It's all Hey,
totally. I got $500 cash. My kids need food. Boom. It starts to get very Civil War-y, very kind of weird. I know this is a bleak picture, but it's important to understand this. And so you don't want your government managing your food supply chain. It's one of the most complex supply chains we have, if you think about it. From farm to table, you think about how complex it is. You want the government running that? That's essentially what Kamala Harris is proposing. She's not the only person to propose it in the history of the world in economics. But I just want to point out,
and
that's
the domino effect.
That's the domino.
So the first domino falls, and it may be a year, 2 years, 4 years.
It's way quicker than that.
And then it goes. You know what I mean? But I'm saying like that's not gonna 1 to 11 is not gonna happen overnight.
It's not overnight.
And I think that's always the warning with policies, and that's why for anyone going to vote, which I love election season, I love all of this, and I'm a proponent. Go vote. But know what you're voting for, right? Do the research and understand the policies from the beginning to the end.
Great point.
And
go do your own research on what I just threw out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Go read about countries that have had price controlling and what that looks like. This is not fear-mongering here.
And what's interesting is the food specifically. I feel like people are already more and more information, even in the last 5-6 years, is coming out about just food in general, right? I mean, the health and what's actually in our food, the processed stuff, so much of that is even a conversation. So naturally, we're all kind of, or I don't want to say all of us, we are a little bit suspecting, like, okay, what really is in this? And then it goes all the way down there where you're like, no, take me off the grid, Ken. That's where my prepping comes in. Where I'm like, you won't see me again.
And listen,
I'll have my corn and my cows.
And you would have to.
And my butter.
You would have to in this scenario, because the reality is,
you couldn't sustain.
If the food is not there, then it is an all-out scramble. And it is rich against poor, family against family. It can get that crazy. And by the way, I know for an American listening to this, and they're maybe new to the show, and they're like, what is Ken gotten dark? No, listen to me. This is happening in countries all around the world as a result of this type of socialistic policy. It's a policy. I'm not calling anybody names.
Yeah.
This is the policy that has been floated.
It's the perspective, the viewpoint that you look through.
You got
in this, right?
So do your homework is all we're saying. If you go do your homework on this and you go, Ken, I don't think that's the scenario, that's fine. But I do think it's important to understand that sometimes, well, not sometimes, many times, what government means for good ends up screwing up the system. And capitalism isn't this stacked system that only helps the rich. It actually is an exchange of goods and services. It's actually a great economic system, right? And I hope that I explained that well. So I tried to, by the way, that's an hour-long presentation that I did in 2 minutes, but that's how that happens. You've got to have the exchange of goods and services.
Yes.
There are moments in an economy where inflation goes up due to the supply and demand. And right now, and I'll give credit where credit is due, I've given Jerome Powell a hard time. I thought that the Fed got us in this mess that we're in. However, the raising of interest rates and holding that we've seen the inflation come down. And so that's good. But there are just seasons where a pandemic and then this and this and this. And so if you want to control inflation, control your income. Control how you spend.
Yep.
Control what you can control.
That's right. Absolutely.
There are ways to save money even when groceries are expensive.
Right. Totally. And I think Dave said it on Laura's show, but it's almost like, let everyone just live. Like if you know what I mean? If the government would just take their hands off of everything, just
will
go.
Solve itself.
But even I was looking at the tax differences even in Trump, because a lot of the Trump tax policies are expiring next year.
That's right.
So even looking into that, you guys, and knowing, hey, what's up? The death tax to the, the child tax credit, I think, could go up under Harris's. So anyways, do your research, everyone.
Yeah. How's it going to affect your pocketbook? Pay attention.
Create your free every dollar budget today, the simplest way to budget for your life.